obviously another big area in this football club is obviously the media department. Obviously, it covers not just things that are going on here at the ground in terms of fan experience, in terms of sort of like PA system, etc., but also has the ability to keep fans in touch that can't make it to home games or away games. There's been a few fans' questions regarding this and in various different areas. The first one, which we'll come to, is more related to the stadium itself, which reads, what happened to the speaker system promised in the South Stand with interviews on the pitch with players pre-match? I think they were installed for one game and then vanished.
Yeah, so first of all, I'm just going to say I'm not across the whole media operation. I have some really good volunteers, including yourself, Adam, who look at that department for me. So I've needed to go and speak to those people involved to get some more detailed answers. So I will need to refer to some of my bullet points that I've got on that. So basically, in answer to that question, so there were two phases to the Explored during last summer. And as part of enhancing the atmosphere during our return to gig, we engaged with a sound company, which looked across a range of solutions for stadiums to give a better experience. Luckily for us, we had some links to a volunteer who was involved in that line of work, and we were able to then look at the overall sound system in an attempt to make the enhancements on a both temporary and potentially permanent basis. Now, today, the figures we've got quoted based on a full acoustic review are found to be very expensive. We're talking six figures to improve the sound system across the whole stadium. Now, these have been put on the potential long-term list for now, with possible ways to introduce these standby by having been considered. But the input devices to the existing system that Brian uses behind the pod just outside here, we've put a new mic and mixing desk have been provided, which will enable long distance mic use, pre-match interviews, etc., and improve the sound quality. Now, these have recently been installed, so hopefully there's a notable difference on the sound output, but we are limited by the standard of speakers in place, however, that we've got. So the temporary speakers that I think you're referring to used at some home games last season were a fantastic addition, but unfortunately we had our fingers burnt on a few occasions by obviously the number of postponements that we got. So these were ended up getting ordered for some games, which were then ended up being postponed. Now, managing this process should be easier this season, and we'll look at, obviously with our 3G pitch, and we'll look at implementing these at the bigger games to really build up the atmosphere. But when we were getting those systems in place at a considerable cost, obviously when you're renting off a third party, if that game then goes awry, you're then still left paying that cost. So again, there's probably a common theme coming in this video today about increasing revenue, looking after your cost base. So that is a key part of it.
And a couple of questions from another fan. The first one of which reads, and we'll then come to the second one. The position of the video camera, would it not be better on the gantry in the south stand higher up? Looks much better on YouTube than lower down like it is in the main stand.
Yeah, so again, I've gone to speak to our media team around what we can maybe do around this. So ultimately, there's no doubt that the gantry position in the south stand would be better. However, the club infrastructure, power, internet connection, these considerations is focused in the main stand. The infrastructure provided to the gantry was supplied by, at the time, the EFL broadcasting contracts, which were pre-2019, for the delivery of the highlights that was used to be used on the evening after a game. The equipment's still in place, however, it's to understand that it isn't actually our equipment to use. And to use the gantry, the club would need to implement its own infrastructure, and the gantry does require some additional checking because we don't know how safety conscious that area is. It's also considered at the moment unnecessary to transfer equipment over to the south stand and up and down the gantry every game when the delivery of streams and highlights is all undertaken on a voluntary basis.
Two questions into one that obviously come from the second part of the fan that's just asked the previous question, the fan that asks the next question, and I'll read both out, but both are along the same lines. the first fan goes, why does it take so long to update the website? I.e., as of composing this email, Bury have played 5 matches in the league with 11 points. That's over a week out of date. And the second fan that's asked a question in a similar vein says, has any thought been given to improving our website, which to be honest is poor compared to clubs in our league, never mind those leagues above us? And there's been, I've seen personally some, again, questions around the website on social media this week.
Yeah, so again, I've taken some time to consult with our media team around this to try and understand where we're at on the journey and how we're looking at improving. So the website is updated on a voluntary basis by members of our heritage group who compile the stats of all the games in their spare time and assist the club in the process. Generally, that's targeted to be updated within 24 hours, but such is the context that gets added to the fixture pages, such as video links, match reports, lineups, quite a bit of people that feed into that. It's not always possible. However, it is done as quick as possible. The delayed scenario mentioned was during the holiday season when the member of the team responsible for completing was away and it was missed by those on the team to pick up in their absence. People with experience using websites is always obviously welcomed. However, the current team do a cracking job in trying to keep this up to date as much as possible. The website was developed with great speed in the summer of 2023 post the merger, and the pre-2019 buryfc.co.uk website was cleared and the content within no longer exists. So everything was effectively started from scratch. Working with a current partner and website developer, there's been developed to provide all functioning aspects of the club over the past 12 to 15 months. News, community news, ticket, shop membership, fixtures, squad details, contact details. There's a lot more to add in, like login details, historical data, which is being worked on. But like everything, it needs dedicated time for volunteers. And so that was a bit of input directly from the media team, which I made some notes on. But from my own point of view, what I will say is, and I always say this is down to volunteers who have full-time day jobs. And I think there has to be a realisation of trying to manage fans' expectations. This isn't what they might want to hear, but it's important in my role that I'm honest. We don't have the payroll or the infrastructure to pay a full-time media team. So ultimately, anyone who gives up their time as a volunteer in any capacity in the football club is greatly appreciated. However, sometimes I think the fans are trying to measure us on clubs that have media people employed, etc. And I know there's a fan there who's talked about comparing us to other teams in the league, but that other team in the league or other teams in the league who will have volunteers, they'll be volunteering on a much smaller ground and they'll need much less volunteers. So you're comparing apples with oranges. We have to have that many volunteers alone. I think it's absolutely amazing. The content we get out on social media, we get out on YouTube, the interviews we do, and every single one of them is a volunteer. And I wouldn't like to be in a place where I'm saying to a volunteer, sorry, you're not acting quick enough. You need to sort it out. Because ultimately, if I said that to anyone and they're working free of charge, I'd expect them to challenge me hard back and say, I've got a full-time day job, Neil. So I think we just have to temper our expectations about where we're operating in and the expectation and delivering on that, because we can't deliver to the standard that sometimes that people expect. And that's just purely down to where we're operating at and the cost and infrastructure that we've got in place.
Just finally on this media section, going on to the sort of second part of this fans question, they say club and fan interaction on social media could do with a refresh. An example is the under 23s match with Combe, which obviously at the time of writing this email was upcoming. Obviously that's now passed. The game is not ticketed, but it's restricted to 200, which we've touched on earlier. The tweet didn't say which stand was going to be used and what would happen if more than 200 turned up. More clarity is needed when posting information to fans. What's your response, and is there anything additional to what you've said previous?
It's only what I said previously, which is ultimately feedback's great. Feedback gives us something we can work with, but ultimately, I don't really want us to start worrying about something that's not happened yet. There will be plans for things moving forward, but like I said on the attendance before, we're not at that level of attendance. So we have enough probably trouble or capacity trying to manage what we've actually got on our plate. To ultimately we have to remember that the click of a finger about 4 weeks ago, we got all our junior teams here, the under 23s here, the under 21s here, the women's team here. All of a sudden, this became a 24/7 operation facility with basically no extra staff. So that brings a number of operational other challenges. So, before we had a volunteer team on a Saturday for the men's first team game. Now, well, okay, it's great getting our women here, but now we need a volunteer Sunday team to execute that as well. And even if the crowds go up, which hopefully they do, and becomes a raging success, don't think for a minute, not in my mind, I'm thinking, well, okay, how are we going to end up volunteering that? Because that's going to take more volunteers. And it's pretty difficult to go to someone who's working a Saturday as a volunteer and say, can you now work a Sunday as a volunteer as well? So what I would say is I'd invite anyone, as I always do, to say, I think we've got 1,500 members. I'd invite any member to come forward, offer to volunteer, offer to get involved. It's your football club, and try and give your time up to improve all these things. There's lots of things we can do better, but we need the manpower to do it.
In terms of volunteers, that obviously leads us on to the final category of today's Q&A, which is sort of the questions that haven't really fitted into any of the discussed categories. I sort of referenced this question earlier, which was around sort of protecting staff and volunteers from sort of being targeted on social media. And the question reads from this supporter: what are we doing as a club to protect volunteers and fans from being targeted on social media and at matches by those focused on causing a divide at the football club?
So first of all, I'd like to say it saddens me that people in 2024 get any form of abuse. It's basically completely unacceptable. And whether people are volunteer or any walk of life, abuse is not acceptable in this day and age. There's a number of things we can do, and we have tried to start doing. I'll try and go through them now. So the first one is that from a volunteer point of view, is that we've just spoken with a partner today, and we're going to be looking at offering some employee assistance programs. So most corporate businesses out there have something called EAP, and that is a phone line that you can call up. You can get advice, counselling, you can get support through on a range of things, whether it's legal issues or emotional support or whatever problems you've got going on in your life currently. So first of all, we're going to be offering something for all our volunteers where they feel they can go and speak to someone. Secondly, we've got our mental health first aiders, which was documented a period of time ago on the website, and they're obviously around on match days, and they're there to support people as well. Thirdly, I know Adam and the media team have put something together regarding a policy, a social media policy that we use on our own channels. So if it becomes abusive, we can try and kick those people off or bar them, which I think is really important. But I think the biggest thing that people can do, despite those three things, pillars that I've just talked about, is try and manage and take some responsibility yourself. So I think it's probably relevant for me to talk about my experience, because people will know that I joined the football club, and because of some of those decisions we talked about earlier with banning, I got a lot of abuse online, tagged in 40, 50 times a day, numerous other things going on. Now, in order for you to manage your own behaviour and manage your own mental health, you have to take some ownership and responsibility for that. So I don't go on, if I go online, I'll go on for so many, 10 minutes a day, 15 minutes a day on Twitter or Facebook, etc. I'll block a number of people that I don't wish to see the content, because it's just negative content and it will just bring me down. And that, before you know it, will be impacting your mental health. So I know we have a lot of volunteers out there. I know there's a lot of volunteers on a lot of WhatsApp groups. I know there's a lot of volunteers on a lot of Facebook groups and all these groups that happen in Bury. And I think at the moment, I think they were started out probably from a positive intent and sharing content about the good times at Bury. And before you know it, we're in 2024, and it sometimes comes across that the world has gone a bit awry, where you can't just have two different opinions and agree to disagree. Now it becomes you're right or you're wrong, and then you get abused if you don't fit in with the narrative. So I think it's important to say to our volunteers that work so hard with the club is the best thing you can do for your own mental health, and in terms of the club supporting you, is if you don't need to be on one of these groups and it's not adding any value, then don't go looking for it. Come off those groups. If it's impacting your mental health, then for you, and you need to come off that. And that's what I've done myself. And what I will say is, certainly over the last 8 or 9 weeks, of course I go on Twitter for a bit of a mood music and to see what the fans are saying and to try and influence certain things. But ultimately, if I just read all the stuff that people said about me all day long, I'd be feeling in a real dark place. So hopefully, with those 4 pillars I've just outlined there, if everyone does that, that is not only the club supporting the volunteer, whether it's the mental health first aider, whether it's EAP, etc. It is to do with the volunteer also helping themselves. And I think that's really important.
2 questions in regards to the Bury FC Golf Day. I'll read both and you can answer them in one block. Which the first question, first part of the question reads, whose decision was it to invite John McGinley? And the second question was, were any of the Bury supporting board members consulted as to whether inviting such a controversial figure was a good idea? Just for context, obviously, John McGinley has played football at a high level, has played for Bolton Wanderers, and there was a game several years ago where John McGinley was playing for Bolton Wanderers, and there was an incident involving the then Bury goalkeeper Gary Kelly, and obviously fans haven't, or certain fans haven't sort of put that to one side. Just give us your take on those 2 points.
As with any question that you've asked me today, I always say, where's that question coming from? So first of all, I think it's important for me to address that. So when I say where's that question coming from, what I mean is it coming from a positive intent point of view? Because whatever answer I give to that question, it can almost sound like they're looking for someone to blame, and I don't know why or why that would be. But ultimately, if I said on camera now that the person was X, that's not going to help any situation. So what I'd say is this: we have committees in place that deal with fundraising, etc. We had a golf committee in place. I'm not part of that golf committee. I wouldn't expect to be part of that golf committee in that decision making. I have enough on the plate to work through. And within the confines of that golf committee, one of the former players that used to play for Bury suggested that this person, John McGinley, come along, and that decision was taken. And I would have known nothing of that decision. I wasn't involved in that decision making process. Ultimately, I think we've got to balance it. That most fans will have seen that on a match day. We always have a former legend involved. Those former legends, we've had one at every game this season, will be friends with, for example, John McGinley. So whether we like that or not. So ultimately, I would imagine within that thought process at the time on the golf committee, they would have had to make a decision along, well, okay, this player, i.e. John McGinley, wants to play. He's been recommended by this other player, and potentially, for all I know, if John McGinley wasn't allowed to play, then we might have lost some other players. So they're not cut and dried decisions. But I wasn't involved in that process, and as a volunteer-run football club primarily, I have to trust the people that are in that process. Now, bear in mind that all those people in that process would have been Bury fans, so they would have known the depth of feeling. I'm sure that you've talked about. I wouldn't have known that depth of feeling because, as I've openly said, I've not been watching Bury for the last 25 years. Ultimately, if I had known that depth of feeling and I was involved, then I would argue that I might have said, okay, we just need to think about this. But clearly, I wasn't involved in that decision, so I couldn't really have my input into it.
I think then, just following up for that, for clarity, John McGinley was then was unavailable to attend the events anyway. Final question. We've covered a lot in this this edition of the CEO Q&A. Final question comes around players' contracts. Obviously, a lot of your sort of secretarial side of your job is making sure that players that are on contracts, that administration sort of process is done correctly, because if not, there can be many issues. This fan asks, I would like to know how many, if any, of our players are under contract, i.e. not free to leave at 7 days' notice. If there is some reason why this question cannot be answered, I would like to be informed what the reason is. first of all, just for clarity for fans that might not know, before we get into the sort of bolts of that question in terms of the contract, just to explain the 7-day process.
Yeah, so it's quite a complex process, so anyone's free to have a read of the rules on North West Counties League at this level. But basically, when you sign a player on this level, so for example, let's use probably Alex Torreira as a classic example. So go back to last season. So Alex played for AFC Liverpool last season. He wasn't a contracted player with AFC Liverpool, so if we decided to send some scouts to watch Alex Torreira, to watch him, and then as a result we wanted to sign him, we would write to that football club and say we wish to input, under FA regulations, we wish to put a 7-day notice in. That gives that club 7 days effectively to speak to that player. Now, within that 7 days, they might put that player then on a contract. That is purely their call. If they don't put that player on a contract and they can't convince that player to stay, effectively then that player after 7 days, or they may waive the 7 days, sometimes that does happen, but if they don't waive the 7 days, on the 8th day, we can then speak to that player and they could potentially sign for Bury Football Club. Now, this is a very complex situation because ultimately you want to build a squad, you want to try and get promoted, you want to protect your assets that are your players, but you don't want to, as I'm sure I won't need to go into any detail on this, expose the club to extensive liability. Okay, so if we had a squad of 19 now and they were all on a contract, clearly you're going to have some players who don't make the matchday squad, but you're still going to pay them because they're on a contract. Now that will have to be balanced against that if you have got players that aren't on a contract and they're playing, say if we've got Bob Smith out there playing really well every week and other clubs are watching him from higher up the pyramid, they could clearly come to us and put a 7-day approach in and effectively take our player and there's nothing we could do about it. But that has to be balanced with the risks and the financial risks. So, to be clear, so Dave gets given a budget from the football board, and then it's up to Dave how he wants to manage that budget within that. Whether he puts 10 players on contracts, 2 players on contracts, they're Dave's calls, and we trust Dave fully to make those decisions. We obviously submit our accounts out each quarter, each month, and on that we'll show first team playing squad so people can see what they are. I obviously can't go into individual player situations and how many are on contract because that's giving away personal data, which clearly I can't do. And even if I was to do that, that would start potentially alerting clubs out there to our current situations in terms of each player, so we can't do that either. But we have to have that balance. Ultimately, if someone came in tomorrow and offered, if we had a player on contract and offered us, 50,000 for a player and he went to play in League Two, then ultimately we have to measure that up against, do we want to lose that player, or actually is 50,000 good for the football club, and that comes in and we negotiate a sell-on clause, for example. So there's lots of factors that come within that, and my view is that as we hopefully climb the football pyramid, we realistically down the line they'll obviously end up becoming some kind of sporting director role, because ultimately they are purely football decisions, although they will have a financial element in terms of doing the best for the football club. So hopefully I've not dodged that question, but in terms of coming out there and saying we've got 5 players on contract, 10 players on contract, clearly I can't do that, and I would expect Dave to have words with me if I did.
Neil, we've covered a lot in many different categories. I hope the fans take those answers on board. Thanks for your time, and I'm sure we'll do another one of these soon.
Yep, I just finally want to say, obviously we're on a very long unbeaten run at the moment, so big kudos to Dave. I know he's got a real strong group of players. They're all committed to what we're trying to achieve here at Bury. They absolutely love the fans, really on board with what we're trying to get going here, and ultimately we all want a winning football team. So let's keep the run going, and hopefully I'll see you all soon on the ground.